Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but if you were at all considering the new top-end F50 Elite, you might want to reconsider, because for $110 less, you can have something that is arguably just as good. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Adidas F50 Pro, the first takedown model in the new F50 lineup, sitting just below the Elite, bearing a retail price of $150. A pair of boots that I genuinely think will go down as one of the greatest takedown models ever to come out of the three stripes, which is a huge accomplishment because their takedown models over the last decade have been pretty awful, especially at this pro tier price point. With the only disappointment being that they're calling this an F50 Pro rather than an F30. However, it being as good as it is very fitting, given that if we go back to the days of the F50 Tune-It, Messi very famously wore a modified variation of the first takedown model F30 rather than the top-end F50. Something that I think a lot of people might want to also consider doing in 2024 with the return of the F50. So with that in mind, we're going to go over all the details of the F50 Pro, compare it side by side with the more expensive Elite model, take a look at how they fit and feel on feet, and ultimately determine where these stand in the value for money race amongst not just other speed boots, but all football boots in general. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, and if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. And as always, if you enjoy these unsugar-coated, brutally honest reviews, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. So first things first, we'll start with the upper, where we're seeing something very similar to what Adidas did with the Predator 24 Pro, where it's effectively the exact same upper as the top-end Elite model with some very subtle modifications. Unfortunately for the Predator, the shaping, the sole plate, the fit, the comfort all falls apart. So even though it does technically have a top-end upper, the boots just don't feel good at all. Not the case with the F50 Pro, which we'll get to in just a second, but what's awesome is you're getting this brand new Fiber Touch upper with the Sprint Web texturing. There is no difference here whatsoever, at least that I can see or feel on feet. The shaping is identical, and the feel is like you'd expect from a $250+ pair of speed boots. Pliable, it has a little bit of that sock-like sensation, but still super thin, giving you that barefoot feel. It's very raw on the ball, and I really love the Sprint Web texturing running along the outside, which realistically is the only significant modification that I can feel, in that in this little section, kind of above the orange line right here, you won't have any additional Sprint Web texturing, which is basically just these little lines giving the upper a gritty finish, whereas on the top-end Elite, you do get some of the texturing kind of here and here, which I wouldn't say is necessarily a case of being better or worse. You just get a little bit more grip across the top of the foot on the Elite, where you do lose out on that a little bit with the Pros, but for the most part, the difference is extremely minimal, and unless you had a Pro on one foot and the Elite on the other, you realistically wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. Across the top of the foot, just like the Elites, you're gonna find a central lacing system with kind of a single lace hole setup, kind of relating this a little bit more closely to the OG F50 Adizeros, which always trended towards the traditional side of upper construction. And then you'll also notice a tongue that does appear to be standing alone, but it's actually part of an internal compression fit system. Again, identical to what you're going to find on the top-end Elite. So basically it's like an inner sleeve made from this super thin, very flexible, almost kind of like neoprene type material that really doesn't have much added structure to it. You can see they have some kind of added fuse to prevent it from stretching too much in the midfoot. Realistically, does it actually make that much of a difference in terms of overall structure? It's really difficult to say, but once you slide your foot in, aside from it kind of bunching up on the sides a little bit where you have to pull on the edges just to make sure that it fits smoothly against your foot, it feels comfortable. It really doesn't get in the way in terms of feel for the ball, and overall, doesn't allow the tongue to slide from side to side while still giving you that kind of traditional look and feel, which is something that I'm a big fan of. So again, everything that was great about the Elite upper is still great with the Pros at $110 less, which is pretty impressive. Moving to the rear, this is where you're going to find the first difference that I wouldn't even say is overly significant to the feel or performance of the boot, and that is the lack of external heel counter. You can see they put this kind of thicker, almost plasticky material as kind of a mock heel counter, if you will, but all the structure is actually internal, which does change the shaping of the heel slightly compared to the top end Elite, but realistically, the general construction of the heel area internally in terms of the liner itself is pretty well identical. So you don't get that external heel counter that's part of the Sprint Frame 360 Soleplate tooling, but the Soleplate you do get, which we'll get into in just a second, does feel very similar. Internally though, you don't get the micro texturing on the soft microfiber liner, but you get pretty much the same material as well as the same amount of padding. The shaping, despite the slight difference in construction, feels very similar. Unlike so many Adidas Takedown models, this does not suffer from a shallow fitting heel. So for the first time in what seems like a long time, somebody at Adidas actually tried these on before putting them into production. So I'm really pleased with that. The overall fit and shape of the boot, like I talked about earlier, feels very similar to the Elites, which is a definite plus. And then the insole fully removable, I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It's pretty well the same as the Speed insole. It's got the exact same liner. It's got some perforations in the heel, and it's made from a single layer of this thin white foam. The only thing that you're not going to get is an extra set of comfort insoles like you'll get with the Elites. But again, they're $110 less, and realistically, the extra insoles don't really feel that different. Moving to the base, you'll find a sole plate and stud pattern that definitely looks very similar to the top end model. However, it is technically different in that it's not a Sprint Frame 360, but instead a Sprint Shell 360, which again does not include that connected external heel counter. Instead, it's a solid piece of plastic for the entirety of the sole plate. It's stiffened in a very similar way with these 3 bars. However, it is a little bit of a different plastic and slightly more flexible through the forefoot. So it doesn't necessarily have much of that spring back effect if that's what you're after. But realistically, even though the top end Elite model is that little bit stiffer and more springy, it's not overly significant compared to other speed boots on the market. Realistically, if you're interested in this new F50, whether you go for the Elite or Pro, you're still going to end up with a more traditional kind of flexible feel compared to most other speed boot alternatives. So what they have here genuinely does feel quite good and could very well be on the top end model, and I wouldn't complain about it. And then of course this is their FG layout, which is pretty much the same general layout we're used to seeing from the Adidas brand at this point, originally introduced in 2010 on that original F50 Adizero. You are getting some blades in the heel as well as some blades at the tip, but the bulk of the studs in the forefoot are kind of like this conical with a bladed edge shape to them. So it's a little bit more traditional in terms of giving you that freedom to twist and pivot when planted. Not to say that it's not an aggressive stud pattern in terms of giving you plenty of bite when pushing off, but again, compared to the competition, not the most aggressive setup. I think they were going for something a little bit more well-rounded, and if that's what you're after, you're gonna be very happy with what these provide. And then there's the weight, which is pretty important considering that these are F50s. It's a football boot that was kind of built on being as light as possible. However, even when we go back to the prime days of the F50 Adizero, the F30, which this technically would be, was never a light boot, and realistically, Adidas Takedown models, especially in the speed category, have always been disappointingly heavy. Is that the case though with the F50 Pro? Both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the top end Elite model. You can see that my scale's not on. You can see that the top end Elite model weighs in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 189 grams. We'll change the scale back to ounces and we'll throw on the Pros, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 205 grams, which for those doing the math at home is a weight difference of 16 grams between the elites and the pros, in favor of the elites, of course. So at the end of the day, if you want the lightest possible version of the F50, spending the extra $110 might be worth it. But realistically, is that 16 grams detrimental to the experience? I would personally argue no, and certainly when compared to other Takedown model speed boots, that 7.2 ounce range or 205 grams is extremely impressive and on par with what you're going to find from most top-end models, speed boots or not. On feet is historically where the vast majority of Adidas Takedown models tend to completely fall apart. It's the case with the $150 Predator 24 Pro. The fit of those is just abysmal. However, the F50 Pro fits and feels pretty much exactly like the $260 Elite model. So not only does it have virtually the exact same upper, but even though the sole plate is technically different, the shape is the same, the feel is the same, the last is the same, the volume is the same, the width is the same, and you guessed it, the sizing is exactly the same. If you had the Pro on one foot and the Elite on the other, you probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference. And that is a very good thing, because not only from a value for money perspective does that make the F50 Pro so appealing, because just because you're spending less money on boots, you don't necessarily want them to be more uncomfortable on purpose. But considering how few differences there are between these and the Elites overall, it really does kind of make the decision to spend the extra $110, nearly twice as much, on the Elites over the Pros, because you're really not getting that much of a better football boot. If the Elites are better than the Pros, it's maybe by 5%, if that. And that's just me being brutally honest. This is a pair of boots that feels like a top-end model at basically half of what you'll typically pay for a top-end model. The out-of-the-box comfort with these is absolutely fantastic. Because the shaping is so similar to the Elites, you're getting that nice wrap around your foot that's definitely tight, but not restrictive in any way. If you want that squeeze your foot sensation, I don't necessarily think the F50 is the best option out there. That's kind of a signature of the Mercurial series. But again, relating this back to the original F50s, they were never boots that were focused around fitting as tight as possible. They always had a little bit more, I guess, forgiveness to the shaping, and that is definitely the case here with the F50 Pros, where they're going to be wide enough for most people as long as you don't have excessively wide feet. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, not only am I surprised at how good the F50 Pro is, I'm probably even more surprised at how similar they made them to the top-end Elites. Where, like I talked about throughout this video, unless you're after something that's a few extra grams lighter, has a little bit of extra micro texture on the surface, and has an external heel counter, if that's just something that you really like in a pair of football boots, there isn't really much of a reason to spend the extra money on the Elites over the Pros at $150. They're so close to each other that it's to the point where if you gave somebody the F50 Pros and told them they were the Elites, I don't think there's anything about the fit, feel, or experience of wearing them that would make them question that they were wearing a Takedown model and not a top-end one.